That's why people call it the fiat Ponzi, because it's just built on paper promises at this point that will never be paid back. And they're putting this really extreme downward pressure on society to outpace this rate of inflation. And no one can, right? I mean, you can't go to your boss and say, hey, groceries are up 20%, so I need a 25% raise. People at the top who get to manipulate the cost of capital and interest rates, and the people closest to them benefit at the expense of everyone else. And then they say, oh, it's the greedy corporations. It's messed up. It's like we're flying in a plane that has no altimeter. We're navigating the seas without a North Star. What I think is great about Bitcoin is whether you are absolutely poor, living paycheck to paycheck, or at the wealthiest possible position, it benefits you.
The first time I heard about you was, I think, on the What Bitcoin Did podcast. And I heard then your story about the American dream, living the upbringing with your parents. And I really loved that story. And the question I asked myself when I listened to that was, how did this all, your upbringing, what you learned from your parents, influence then your thinking of Bitcoin and what you're doing now?
Sure. I mean, I'm so grateful to have had two parents who were willing to sacrifice so much just to give their kids a better life. And that was what the American dream represented for them. So by the time they came, I remember there was a lot of trepidation. My mom was 38, my dad was 41, and they just were nervous. You know, they didn't know the language. They didn't know what would happen, but they just had this hope. They had this hope that outweighed all of the worries and the anxiety. And they wanted to create a foundation for their kids to live a better life than they did. They grew up under communism. And so for me, it's self-imposed. I always put a lot of pressure on myself to just work really hard and succeed so that I can justify their sacrifices. I was someone who I just want to help my parents and make them proud. And when I saw them go through all the financial obstacles they did, especially after the great financial crisis, it lit a fire under me. It planted a seed where I wanted to understand how this could happen to hardworking, good people who play by the rules and pay all their taxes. But it motivated me to help make a difference and be part of a change and hold people accountable. And so again, I'm really grateful because my childhood was not easy. And I didn't have financial security, and I had no guarantees of what was going to happen with any path that I took. But I had this great motivation and two parents who told me that if you work hard, you can achieve anything you want. And that is, again, the American dream. And so finding Bitcoin for me was this very full circle moment because I finally realized what was broken in the system and how and why. And I connected the dots, and there was this amazing solution as well, that if we embrace it, we can fix so many of the problems in society. And it won't be overnight. It won't be easy. There will be obstacles, but we can usher in more flourishing and prosperity than we've ever known.
Yeah, and you even went ahead and quit your usual job to go full time on Bitcoin. And I actually quite myself. I'm right now in the process of doing that. I'm working with 21 Bitcoin, a sponsor here in Austria, and stuff like that. So I know till now this was my hardest decision ever. I worked 6 years in a really good paying job, a loving community even there, and it was just a topic that did not interested me. It was IT security and not Bitcoin. So I went ahead and did that. And I know how hard this is of a decision. And you also did that. What was your situation when you did that? Did you have like a financial savings where you're like, oh, I can land on something, or like completely, let's jump into it?
Well, I've always been a really good saver because of my background, and I've always been a big risk taker. I just think if you don't take a chance, you'll never know. And I would hate to look back and wonder what if, rather than to do something and then fail and ultimately learn from it. So I saw this great opportunity, and I felt like I had the right training and preparation for it with my media skills. I felt like I could really help with education and getting the message out. And so I just thought, well, I'll take a chance and I will live off of savings for a year. And if it doesn't work out, I can always try to get another job, and maybe I'll have to take a step back, but I can always go back to that. I know that industry. I know I have the skills for it. So why not? Why not see what I can build and really take a chance on myself? And I sort of stumbled into the whole thing because I loved podcasting. I listened to a lot of podcasts because they were really interesting long form interviews, and you got to hear all the different layers of a story or of an individual's life, and you got more context than you would if you watched, say, a short story on TV news, which was the kind of storytelling I was doing. I would work a whole day or sometimes weeks or months on end to put together a 90-second or 2-minute story. And I prefer a long form interview where you just kind of get to know someone or a topic a little bit more. So I started to do the podcast as just a hobby. And then about a year in, I decided to take a chance and go off on my own.
It's amazing. What's like, I feel like, especially the younger people don't watch normal TV. I don't know how it's in America. In
Yeah.
Austria, I see the younger people don't watch the normal TV. It's also sponsored by the state. I don't know how this is
Well,
it's in America, the whole thing.
it's supposed
Uh,
to be independent, but
I mean, how can you be independent if you get tax money from someone?
right, right.
But
Yeah.
it's like how do you see the whole thing going when there's traditional TV where there's still a lot going on, but I feel like it's the older generation. Older generation, of course, they're older, they die out at some point,
Hmm.
or is it just like an age thing? And how is YouTube now playing out? I also saw something interesting. There was like comparison between TV shows and YouTube shows. And there are a lot of YouTube shows that now have a higher cost of production per minute than most of
Oh,
the
I
TV
bet.
shows. So, like when you look at Mr. Beast and something like that, how do you see this whole media scene playing out?
Oh my gosh, it's crazy to see how much the media industry and news has evolved since I was a little kid dreaming of becoming a newscaster. My family immigrated when I was 5, and we watched a lot of American news programs because it helped my parents learn English. So I grew up on all the big newscasters of that time: Diane Sawyer's, Barbara Walters, Oprah Winfrey. And I thought, what an amazing career. They get to interview people, important people, be on the front lines of history. They got to get paid to learn, essentially, and travel to incredible places. And I just thought it was a very noble profession, especially if you do investigative journalism and you hold people accountable and you follow public records and you make sure that, things are done in a way that isn't corrupt. But by the time I entered into the industry, the technology was already shifting the business model. Internet was making it so that the revenue streams were starting to splinter off. Independent content creators were slowly starting to emerge. But even the technology made it so that a reporter was now doing the job of like 5 people. They would be the producer and the editor. And sometimes I went from shooting on this massive, massive camera all by myself to all of a sudden in my last job, I would shoot some stories on my iPhone, which is crazy. And meanwhile, the pay wasn't keeping up with the cost of living. When I was young, a local news reporter could make a really good living, afford a nice house. And by the time I was working in the industry, you were getting paid, I mean, a fifth of the salary that you needed in order to afford a nice life. So I saw a drastic shift happen. And you're right, young people, especially as the internet came out, why would they sit down at 5:30 to watch a 30-minute newscast that was probably already out of date because everything online is so immediate and 24/7? And that was an interesting shift as well. My favorite news market that I worked in was actually my first one. It was in a town called Palm Springs, California, and it's a retirement. It's very known for being a retirement community. So my audience was generally like 70s, 80s, and up, and they actually watched the news. And so I felt like my work mattered because I would go to a grocery store and people would say, "Oh, I saw your story." But as I got to bigger cities, no one would say that to me because none of them watched the news. They had no idea what I was doing, it was kind of sad, because you want your work to make an impact. And what are you doing this story for if nobody's going to watch it? So it was interesting to see how people were shifting from the television, the legacy era of that, to consuming everything here and everything's immediate and you have citizen journalists. And I think the way I'll wrap up this tangent is it was also sad to see more and more politicization. Everything was turning into left and right. And I felt like some of the networks were more biased toward certain political agencies or government agencies in general. Instead of questioning it, it was just always presented as fact. and no one could kind of question it. And that bothered me at my core because my background, my parents, again, they grew up under communism. They were always very skeptical of what they were being told by the government or by the media. And so it didn't sit well with me. I really, again, I wanted to question more things, hold them accountable. I wasn't able to always cover the stories the way I wanted to. So I'm very grateful that decentralized media and decentralized money allowed me to have this career instead.
Yeah, I mean, we see it with so many examples, like the Tucker Carlson went
Yeah.
from a Fox to now Independent, and now it seems like everybody knows him. Before it was like a smaller group, and especially more in America.
Yeah.
I feel like in Europe, where I'm based, is like now everybody knows Tucker Carlson and speaks about
Yeah.
him. It's interesting, but also politics. I speak with a lot of Bitcoiners about how Bitcoin can change. Politics and the societal level. And this is one question I still have not figured out for myself. How can Bitcoin, like I see a lot of extremists going on, a lot of not going good on the politics side, a lot of frustrations in people. And how can Bitcoin be a positive change in politics, or can it be, because in the end of the day, it's just money?
I love that Bitcoin is apolitical and people on the left and the right, they can embrace it, and the principles fall in line with what both sides are really passionate about and advocating for. It ultimately is about empowering the individual. And I think that a lot of people today are turning to politics and getting distracted by social issues that aren't really about the core of what's wrong, because they don't have the education about how our financial system works. They have a skewed version in their minds of what capitalism is. I mean, capitalism is about saving. It's about the free market allocating resources and everyone having an equal opportunity to create value. It's not about some people at the top who get to manipulate the cost of capital and interest rates, and the people closest to them benefit at the expense of everyone else. And then they say, oh, it's the greedy corporations, right? It's like, it's messed up. It's like we're flying in a plane that has no altimeter. We're navigating the seas without a North Star. And I'm so grateful that we've come to a place where we do have something like Bitcoin, because before I would have looked to the future, and I was for a while thinking nothing's going to fix this. It's just only going to get worse. And I'm worried about the next couple of decades and what my children, the kind of world they will live in. And now I look at it with hope that we have a tool that will help solve these problems, and it won't be easy or happen overnight, right? We're going to have a ton of pushback and obstacles, and we have to educate a lot of people, but we have a tool of hope and empowerment. And if we didn't, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'd be a big gold bug thinking we got to go back on the gold standard.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I got an interesting question from a guest like 2 or 3 episodes ago. How can Bitcoin change people's life? And he especially asked for someone that is maybe living paycheck to paycheck, has already 2 jobs, and is like, how can I cannot even save any money. I cannot I cannot even dream of paying for a hardware wallet or something like that. How can Bitcoin help, like especially those kind of people? And I think for that question, probably we have to get on a broader scale and a little bit of a longer time horizon, because it's not immediately. But how can Bitcoin change the lives of those kind of people in a positive way?
What I think is great about Bitcoin is whether you are absolutely poor, living paycheck to paycheck, or at the wealthiest, possible position, it benefits you. And I know that it's so hard for people who are just barely treading water with the cost of living, but there is something that you could probably start to reallocate, right? I mean, instead of spending money on, even if it's a meal or a coffee, I mean, everyone spends money that maybe they could have allocated it in a different way. Being able to put it into this piece of technology and an asset that has outperformed everything else, that actually allows you to be able to save. I look at Bitcoin not as an investment, not as something that carries all this risk and you're just sort of gambling and speculating and waiting to sell it and pass it off to something else. I see it as truly returning us to sound money and the ability to save. Again, I see it as a savings technology. And whether you make a little or a lot, everybody needs to save. And the alternative system that we've been living in has just been this house of cards built completely on debt. And we need ever expanding credit to create less and less real productivity and real value. And so our whole system, that's why people call it the fiat Ponzi, because it's just built on paper promises at this point that will never be paid back. And they're putting this really extreme downward pressure on society to outpace this rate of inflation. And no one can, right? I mean, you can't go to your boss and say, hey, groceries are up 20%, so I need a 25% raise. And so it's starting to get to that point where I think the average person is feeling it more and more. In the United States, I think people were so lucky for so long because being the global reserve currency and really the closest to the money printer, it created a lot of immediate and long lasting, I mean, decades long wealth. The middle class was booming for a very long time. And now it's sort of collapsing because the system at its core is unsustainable. It doesn't create real value and growth and productivity. It exports a lot of the inflation to other nations. But now it's kind of like hollowed out at its core. And so from here to developing nations, the average worker is suffering and unable to keep up with the pace of everything getting more expensive. And this is what Jeff Booth talks about, right? It's like productivity, technology, it's supposed to drive prices down. You're supposed to be able to afford more, maybe work less. And we're not seeing that. It's not the reality. And we've turned houses into savings accounts. They're so far overvalued to what they're actually worth. There are shacks in certain parts of America that are worth millions of dollars. You have to renovate the whole thing. It's about to, fall over on itself. And it's worth, $2 million because maybe it sits near a beach. That's insane. That's not an indicator of a healthy economy, and spending when you don't have the money. That's not an indicator of a healthy economy. So we need something that addresses that. And again, I know it's hard for people who don't have a lot of money, but even putting a little bit, the fact that you can buy $1, €1, €1, €1 of Bitcoin, that will start to make a difference. It will. Otherwise, you're just treading water with money that's consistently worth less.
I'm super excited to announce that this podcast got the first ever sponsor. 21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. Yeah, it's amazing. And for me, always the question comes up, there's so much more pain coming. And even now, there's so much more pain in all the systems. And in the same time, there's such great Bitcoin educators, just like yourself, in the system. And I'm like, then I go out in the normal land, if I can say it like that now. Why do so many people struggle to still get Bitcoin? Like a small story. I quit my job and I said, like, I'm doing this Bitcoin podcast thing now. People had in mind, oh, I'm this crypto guy now. It's like this completely weird thing of Bitcoin. And it seems like with everyone I talk that is not in the Bitcoin world has a completely offset view of Bitcoin. Like why are we still so early?
I mean, that's a great question. We're all working on trying to help onboard so many people, but there is so much resistance. And I think at the core of that is people just really don't understand how the financial system works. And I was one of them. They don't understand the plumbing. They don't understand how governments print money. They don't understand the history of money and how it evolved. Before Bitcoin, I didn't know what the F happened in 1971, right? I didn't understand all of this. I was really little. So I think we need to increase financial literacy everywhere. I think one of the reasons why we see Bitcoin hitting all-time high prices in a lot of different nations, especially in the developing world, is because there's a pain point, there's like a reality and a problem that it solves immediately today. Whereas sometimes in the West, we're kind of coddled into a false sense of safety, and this 40-60 portfolio in America has been safe and it's performed well. And so people don't really question it. And I think we've sort of diverged from, at least here in the United States. Like I always admired our founding fathers because I just thought that they were really courageous and smart, and they created the foundation for what was the most empowering, flourishing government that we've had. I mean, all of it's really kind of an experiment, right? But I think that what they set up was the best possible way to sort of decentralize the power and have checks and balances. And like in an imperfect world, it was the best version of government that was being attempted. But now here we are with the central bank and the purchasing power of the dollar getting demolished, the wealth gap growing, the average person not feeling like they can make it. And so we need to reevaluate some of these things and return to a sense of that spirit of individuality and that rugged, passion about freedom and creating your own destiny, as opposed to just looking to the government for all your solutions. Oh, well, please send me, my helicopter money and provide me with my basic income just for existing. It's like, where is the drive and the motivation to create your own future and be productive and create value? I think that's what's sad, is so many people just are lulled into this convenience and comfort of, well, I expect to get a payment every month. And no, like we're owed nothing. And I think the most beautiful things are created from just raw resources that we put to use through creativity and entrepreneurship. And we don't have a lot of that. We don't have the opportunity for that. We don't have free markets. Mass corporations make it difficult for small business owners to compete and try to innovate and create new things. So it really skews everything in the economy. Preston Pysh talks about this a lot, right? The lack of biodiversity. We just have concentrated capital and concentrated power so much that everything's just a mass corporation, mass food, mass this, and that doesn't showcase the vibrant diversity of us as human beings and what we could potentially create and how we could interact with one another, especially economically. So I see a lot of hope with Bitcoin maybe changing that, and maybe I'm overly optimistic, but we need that. I mean, I like imagine the world on a Bitcoin standard, and I smile because I'm like, we could create the most beautiful things. And yeah, maybe it'll be harder in some ways. You're not going to get a paycheck from the government every month, but it'll be so much more worth it. You're not going to be like a zoo animal with your water and 3 meals every day and your cage for safety. You're going to be out in the wild, like creating your own destiny. And I think that's amazing.
That's wow. That's really really cool and beautifully said. And I think this all what you said is like it fills in this everything bubble, like the
Yeah.
housing bubble. Everything is getting just propped up, and it's like, oh yes, I
Mhm.
have my houses, and then like 10 years, oh it's at 20x more worth. Like why is it 20x more? Nobody is even questioning that. Yeah, of
No,
course, my house that needs
I know.
renovation is way shittier than 20 years ago. Now is 20x
Yeah.
worth more. Like that's crazy. How do you see like the economy going from like maybe the economy in the near term, like the next year, going, and maybe in the long term, like 10, 10, 20 years? Do you see that bubble burst somehow, or how long can we drag this out?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly it's unsustainable. And we have this cycle of booms and busts, and each one is more intense and dramatic than the last. But how many times can you do it and bail out the system, right? And paper over it until you're totally just like, I mean, you have a hollowed out economy and no one's going to trust your currency anymore, which I think is what's starting to happen globally as people start to move away from the dollar. And it'll take a long time, but I do feel like we're on the brink. We're in the middle of this paradigm shift where things are changing. Jeff Booth says it's going to reprice asset classes like real estate. I mean, I can't imagine a world where prices are getting less expensive. And I think everyone is terrified of that, right? But it is crazy that all of this money, I mean, when it's printed, it has to flow somewhere. And over the last few decades, it has caused just exponential asset inflation, and there it's completely decoupled from reality. Again, a shack that's breaking down and barely able to stand is worth a ridiculous amount of money on the real estate side. And then look at the stocks. I mean, price to earnings is just insane. And these companies are so decoupled from their fundamentals, and the products and services are just getting worse and worse. I mean, has anyone flown any commercial airline lately? It's like, I mean, they go into debt, they buy back shares. Everything is about the share price. Grant Williams was just on my show, and he said something I thought was so brilliant. we don't even approach stocks as owners anymore. Like the point of having stock is to own. You're an owner in the company. You want it to succeed. You're invested in what their products are and their management. No, we're renting stocks. We just want the price to go up. We're ready to pass it off to the next one if one starts to, halt or go down. We don't care. We don't care about being owners. And when you own something, you take care of it, right? When you rent, you're kind of like, well, this isn't mine. And we need to change that. And I think that Bitcoin will cause a lot of that to change, but that means that there's going to be a lot of chaos, and it's going to be good. It's going to be bad. Thank goodness we have this life raft and we can peacefully opt into it, because I hope that it is not this seismic shift and deflationary bust that ushers in, Great Depression 2.0, and everyone's calling for the redistribution of wealth and 75% taxes on those greedy Bitcoiners or something. I hope that it's a more peaceful transition. But who knows? I mean, the next couple of years, I think, will be crazy. It'll be more political, more polarizing. And that's one of the reasons why I think we have to get the message out to more people, because when you learn about Bitcoin, you can't help but feel more hope. You don't fall for all the political nonsense, and you start to think about what you can do to contribute and build, and you feel more safe and comfortable about the future. Like you don't have to panic so much. We're going to build a better world, but it'll be a wild ride to get there.
Definitely, and it's also the timing will be interesting. How long can it take till we get there? And I think
Yeah.
education is like so key to
Yes.
all of that. And you posted, I don't know when it was, but I saw it on Twitter where you posted your YouTube statistics, how many females and males there were, and I think it was 20% or something like that. You
Yeah, a
had
little more.
females,
Yeah.
and it was interesting because mine is like 5 or 4 or something like that,
Mhm.
really, really, really low. So first of all, like, why do you think there are so many more men than women in the Bitcoin space, and how can we change that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my missions. I really want to make this more approachable to women, and I want them to be passionate about it. I think my girlfriends, they don't like to talk about money. They like to buy experiences and all that, and a lot of them are stressed about making enough, but they don't like to talk about like the money or the plumbing. I also think in general, and this is kind of generalizing, but I think that men are more interested in things like math, technology, engineering, finance, because they're attracted to like tools and solving problems. Whereas women are a lot of the times more attracted to careers that deal with people, right? I mean, nursing, education, again, generalizing a little bit, but I I think one of the most beautiful attributes that women have is this nurturing inner instinct that allows us to form community very easily. We like a sense of community. We think about, how people are feeling and if they feel welcome, and so we need to introduce more of that. I think we need to create more of that feminine energy within the Bitcoin space so that it does feel more like a community. And what's funny is girls sometimes get the bad reputation of, oh, they're catty and whatever, they fight with each other. I'm sorry, but all the women on Bitcoin Twitter are like peaceful and happy and very positive, and all the guys are constantly going at each other and fighting. So I just think we need a little bit of that female touch, the warmth, and not everything has to be so technical and rigid. But I think it's just going to take more women so that people can see themselves represented, and then they feel invited. Like I love to learn and network with and from other women. So I think that the more that we see women getting involved, the more women they will bring in, and I think it's all accretive. I mean, Bitcoin's not just for women, it's not just for men, it's not for old, it's for everyone. And I think that that's the big core takeaway. But women especially need to be more financially empowered. I know a lot of them are worrying about their futures and their children, and my friends are certainly worried about how they're going to make ends meet. And I sometimes wonder, I'm like, well, I'm offering you this tool. Why are you not, drinking the water? I'm leading you to it. But everyone has their own, I guess, their own journey and what makes them actually go down the rabbit hole.
I mean, in my own personal experience, and this is like a really small personal experience. It's like for me when I tell some male friend of Bitcoin, they usually tend to be really fast with jumping in. they, sometimes like, yeah, let's try it out. They like, okay, where can I buy it? Send me some link.
Yeah.
And women are more cautious. Maybe just my
Mhm.
personal experience, but I don't know
Yep.
if you also see that kind of behavior, that they're more
Yeah.
cautious, more conservative about those stuff. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of women do see this space as sort of gambling and very speculative. And if you go to a casino, I mean, there I feel like I've always seen more men at casinos than women. And when you
Definitely.
look at anything in this space, right, Bitcoin is this really interesting combination and intersection of so many different industries and studies and levels of expertise. I mean, in terms of just bringing together finance and computer science and technology and physics and all of that. And again, a lot of those industries are dominated by men. So I really hope that women get excited to learn about how to empower themselves financially for the future so that they can plan and take care of their families and be able to take chances on some of the things that they want to create. And it's funny because I'm trying to get more out into that community, and a lot of my girlfriends, they consume, and I do too, they consume a lot of lifestyle content, life travel, cooking, kind of fashion. And it's like, how do you incorporate Bitcoin with that? That's the
You should
question.
you should start a daily vlog. Maybe that's what's missing.
There's something there. I just got to try to figure it out.
Speaking of community, I sometimes do that before. If a guest is very well known on the podcast, I did it with Jeff Booth, I did it with Adam from Relay Team, with some others, where I asked the community, "Hey, I have
Mhm.
Natalie Brunell on. Do you have some questions?" And I think there are like 20, 50 questions coming up. And I picked the three that I found most interesting.
Okay.
And the first question would be like, if Bitcoin wouldn't be here, what would you do right now?
Great question. I would probably be really passionate about gold. I'd be all about the gold standard. I think at the same time, I worry that I would be very pessimistic about the future because I was getting to that place where I looked at the future and I thought, how am I going to afford a family? How am I going to afford a house? Am I going to need 5 jobs just to keep up with the cost of living? I was looking at the future with a lot of fear and anxiety. And now I look at it with a lot of hope.
Yeah, it's Bitcoin does do a lot of things, and I think Bitcoin stole a lot of brain energy from gold over the years. Yeah.
Totally.
Second,
Except for Peter Schiff's. We're waiting.
I don't know. I kind of gave up. I think we will wait a long time, but let's see. Do you see? And this is a bigger question, but I think the answer is no. But it's a bigger question to like think about it. Do you see a danger of Bitcoin ETFs centralizing Bitcoin?
I don't, and I think Lynn Alden has been doing a really great job, sort of reporting on the actual facts of this. When you look at the distribution of Bitcoin, how very little is concentrated with any of these ETF issuers, but also just in general. I mean, they could buy up 1 million Bitcoin right now at these Wall Street firms, and they will have no greater influence over the protocol. That is the beauty of proof of work. The fact that it is reliant on energy. It is reliant on this randomized system that gives no one an extra advantage, and it's distributed around the globe. So, no, I'm not worried about it. I understand that people are a little bit wary and they see it as sort of the legacy financial system oozing into this space that's all about decentralization and freedom. But if you don't like the ETFs, you don't have to buy them. That's what's great. You could buy the real thing and self custody it, which is, I think, the purest, truest form of Bitcoin. But the fact that it's an option for, say, pension funds and investors that are dipping their toes in and financial advisors, I think it's just all accretive and it benefits all of us.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like even if they buy a lot, they cannot control it, and there's not too many Bitcoin available anyway. So Bitcoiners are
That's
not
right.
selling.
They're going to drive up the price. They already are.
But you're a lot on Fox News, and actually, this was a question that came up in the community, but also the last guest. I have an Andrew TV, and the last guest asked a question for the next guest, and similar question came up. You're really good now on Fox News. I love your snippets when you are on Fox News, and I think I don't know if you're also on other media outlets,
Thank you.
and the question would be, what media outlet would you love to be on to educate about Bitcoin?
Joe Rogan podcast. Because it has such a big audience. And he's a Bitcoiner, but not fully there. I just think we need to get out the message to the highest number of people. So anyone who has that kind of platform and influence, they are the ones that need to be orange pilled, because when you build an audience like that, the audience really trusts you. And so the potential there to orange pill millions and millions of people is really incredible. I also think we need to orange pill more, nation state leaders. But Joe Rogan's show, that would be my dream.
Did you hear the speech of Nayib Bukele? I think it was all over my Twitter feed today.
If it was today, no, I haven't seen it yet.
It was where, maybe it was also yesterday, but where he talked about that fear there's a bubble that will burst, and I don't know, like in Washington, I think he gave the speech. Really, really cool.
Yeah, no, he's been great. He's been great speaking about it, and the performance is speaking for itself right now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We have this end routine, and this kind of comes back to the Fox business, where the last guest asked the question about for the next guest, and your last guest was the CEO and co-founder of Geyser, the Metamic.
Oh yeah.
And he asked, "You're so much on Fox News and Fox Business. When will you be running it?"
Well, I think that in the future they will have more shows or content that is about Bitcoin, maybe. I don't know. I mean, they can call me. I'm available. I don't know. It's so freeing to be your own boss and to create your own content. Like, I'm just so grateful for what I'm doing. There are things that I miss about the network life. It's fun to work with a big team of people because it's so collaborative. And I have worked with some amazing editors and producers over my career. I love the collaborative spirit and energy and creativity. But I feel so empowered that I get to interview people and ask the questions that I want to ask based on my research. And there is a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, right? And I really take it as a huge duty and responsibility to do my homework and make sure I'm putting accurate information out there. But it's it's so fulfilling, and it's such an honor that I get to do this. And I've created it all. No one handed it to me, and I'm not beholden to anyone. I did it all by myself. So I don't know if I would even go. That would have to be a really big offer.
Are you still completely alone with your podcast and everything you do, or do you have like employees or help?
So I have a little bit of help, but I don't have a team. I mean, when I was at a news network, there were a dozen people that you were working with at any given time, and people operating cameras and all of that. I'm in a studio right now by myself. I have someone who helps me on the production side afterwards, which I'm really grateful for. But yeah, it's really cool that, especially with technology and how it's advanced, you can do a lot with just being one person.
Yeah, definitely. Natalie, thank you for being on. Thank you for taking the time. And I think I usually ask the question, where can people get in touch with you? But you're everywhere. But what's the best way to contact you and email you and DM you?
Sure. So I hope you check out my podcast, Coin Stories. It's on YouTube. I publish episodes on X and all the audio platforms. My website is talkingbitcoin.com. And I also have a newsletter, brand new as of this year. It's free at nataliebrunell.substack.com. So I hope you check it out, especially if you like visual, easy to digest news updates about Bitcoin and the global economy.
Thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.